And I open it up by saying it doesn't matter what your politics are. You can't ignore the tears of a mother, and no mother should have to bury her child. And so we did the show, and I'm standing outside and they're walking out, and the good old boys are walking past with tears rolling down their faces. And their wives would translate for them. You touched him. You got a convert tonight. And so that's what I believe art can do. And so this is why it's important to support artists, not in abstract, but in concrete ways. Because they might be our last hope. Thank you.
It's hard when you know someone really well and love them and don't want to compliment them. And it turns out that they're really talented. It's really hard. It's really difficult for me. A lot of conflict right now in my heart. We're going to make room for questions and conversation. But tomorrow, Reverend Sekou is going to be here in Portland with our friends at the NAACP. And it's going to be an event that's only for African-American men, as I understand it. But I wanted to have a time. This morning I got to sit down at Poshines with some of my good friends. And I wanted to have a time for some dialogue. And I thought better than me doing it, someone else that you all know and love and respect. So I'd like to welcome up my friend, the pastor of Celebration Tabernacle Church, the president of the NAACP, and quite the artist himself, Pastor E.D. Mondaday. Come on up. Round of applause for E.D.
Sure. I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna just show you. So I'm gonna show these. No, come on over here, baby, because I'm gonna show you. I only play. Come over here, baby. Because I only play in F sharp. Todd, do you remember this? Come on. Let me say. That's easy. You got it? No, y'all can figure this out. Because you remember this? I can't remember this one. No matter where you are, life's journey. Or where you're coming from. You can always call this place home. Right there. No matter where you've been or what you've done. You got it? Yeah. You go ahead. Don't go nowhere now. You stay right there. Stay right there. So, I really don't like talking no more. I really just want to sing. Is that all right?
That's all right.
So I wrote this song, Pastor. I used to pastor in this other church in New York City, and what can you mean to pull it away? Okay, and so these queer kids used to come to the church for like soft skills, right? Because in New York City, it's about 5,000 homeless queer kids. Many of them coming out the South, called the first thing smoking in New York City. and many of them wound up in the sex trade. And so they show up at the church about 8 o'clock at night. So, you know, I've been there since 7, so the Holy Ghost ain't nowhere near me at this point. Because I'm mad. And so they would come into church, and one of the babies sit next to me, and they gender non-conforming. I can't tell if it's a boy or a girl. I just call everybody baby so I don't misgender nobody. At 48, I can do that. So the baby comes in, and they was like, we got to listen to you preach. I was like, no. I preached once, and they only paid me for one sermon, so they're not getting another one for free. And then the baby was like, well, we got to join your church. I was like, no. You asked too many questions. I don't want you in my church. They said, well, what do you want from us? And I realized, I was like, oh, you don't feel safe here. And the church loved me. Everything I am is because some old people in the church loved me. I come from a mighty people. And then I could tell that the baby smoked. So I was like, I want a cigarette. So when I sat and I smoked with him, I'm the coolest pastor in New York City. That hurt. And so I wrote this song for him. No matter where you are on life's journey, or where you're coming from, you can always call this place home. No matter where you've been or what you've done, no matter where you are on life's journey, no matter where you are or where you're coming from, no matter where you're coming from, you can always call this place home. No matter where you've been or what you've done. Can I say it again? No matter where you are on life's journey, or where you're coming from, you can always call this place home. No matter where you've been or what you've done, no matter where you've been or what you've done, no matter where you've been or what you've done, no matter where you've been or what you've done, no matter where you've been or what you've done. Can you say that with us? No matter, no matter, no matter where you've been or what you've done, no matter where you've been or what you've done, no matter where you've been or what you've done, no matter where you've been or what you've done, no matter where you've been or what you've done. Say one more time. No matter where you've been or what you've done. Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll probably do this for a light of mine. I want you to jump in on that. Is that all right, Pastor? Yeah. Thank everybody. Put your hands together for Todd. He didn't know he was going to be working. How you?
I'm doing great. I'm
sitting here with you. You talked about dumb things, like dumb books. But you've written 5 dumb books.
3. I signed a contract for 5. They should never give you money up front. It's really on them. So I've just finished 2, and I got this one that's giving me the blues, and hopefully I'm going to get done soon, The Task of the Artist. And then there are 2 books that were half finished. One I started before Ferguson on Martin Luther King. That's kind of morphed, and it's called It's Not Your Daddy's Civil Rights Movement, Black Lives Matters and the Legacy of Martin Luther King. And then I have a book about Ferguson. It's a kind of thick theological treatment called The Liberation Theology of Ferguson, and they're both half done.
In 2015, we honored this man, Reverend Sekou, and the NAACP with the History Maker Award, and we're glad to know that he is making history. Can we have some dap there? Come on.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things I'm concerned about in the struggle that we're seeing in America, President Trump really did us a great favor. He did. He brought us to great revelation about where we really are. Growing up in St. Louis, I grew up in the projects.
Which one?
South Side, Doris Webby, on 12th Street. Now it's Tucker, 1305, apartment 302.
Oh, I know the Webby.
Oh, yeah. Right across the alley.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We know what roaches are there, you know, and we saw roaches in our house, and Mama wasn't having it. So our weekends would be spent cleaning up in the closet, taking everything out, spraying stuff, and etc. We didn't leave roaches, and we didn't leave dirty sink. We didn't leave dirty trash can. We had to take everything out so that roaches, even though they encroached on our territory, they weren't in our house. We kept them at bay. So what happens is when we get clumsy and we leave things out and stuff begins to just, you know, ruinate, roaches come and they encroach upon your territory. Well, President Trump came in and turned on the light, and we found out what? We had roaches.
Right.
And we are raid. We know how to get rid of roaches, don't we? Yeah. So President Trump has really done us a favor by showing us that we thought we had cleaned up real well, but we still have some cleaning to do. We find environmental injustice everywhere we see Martin Luther King, even right now. In every area where there's a Martin Luther King, you find environmental injustice, and you talked about that a little bit. In Portland, we were privileged to do something about it. I was chief petitioner for the Clean Energy Fund. They didn't think that was going to work, right? So our initiative was to take a 1% surcharge of every corporation here that raised $1 billion, and then that would go back into the pot for clean energy for communities of color that would otherwise not be able to sustain themselves in an environmental way as other communities will. Did you hear what I said? And it passed, right? Come on, give us some claps for that. So there's a lot to be said about the climate, about climate justice, and these things are kind of new to us in our community, but we're forging this war. And I heard you talk a little bit about that tonight. How do you see this climate injustice really taking its toll on the African American community?
Well, you know, if you look at, like, in terms of asthma rates in black communities, right, which is usually facilitated by lead in subpar housing, also the way in which the highways are structured, oftentimes running through black communities, and so the exhaust impacting them that way. And then, so, I mean, those are all, you know, part and parcel of it. I'm thinking about, do you know the work of the Jesus people? It's these black women in Cancer Alley. It's basically run from, like, Jackson all the way down to New Orleans, because, you know, they got all that stuff. I think it's some nuclear stuff around there too. And there's these group of praying women who've been doing some amazing work. And then there's a man named Damu Smith. You remember Damu from St. Louis?
Yes, I remember.
Great black environmental justice worker who, because of his work, he didn't have health care and found out too late that he had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And so there is a tradition of African Americans struggling against environmental justice. It has just kind of taken a new formulation, in part because of the work of Van Jones and others, for the questions of environmental justice and green economy as a way to talk about both the questions of environmental justice and the question of unemployment. And so there's been some really great work, I think, around the question. The challenge is it too late? Mm-hmm. Because the planet is crying out. And if there's a way to kind of turn it around, of course, the work of our dear brother, so Harvard boy, 360, Bill McKibben, has done some interesting work, as well as the work of Naomi Klein. Have done some good work around these questions. But yeah, I was just in the Arkansas Delta, where I'm from, part of the Lane riots. The Lane riots happened in 1919, over 230 African Americans killed, over $1 million of property seized, maybe the largest racial riot in the United States, and part of response to black and white folks organizing together from the Southern Tenant Farmers Organization, the socialists organizing black people in this region in the Lane. And so I was on the Truth Commission, it's the 100th year anniversary coming up. And just driving through, coming out of Memphis and hitting that Delta and hitting them back roads, the ecological devastation as well as the economic devastation rivals that of a third world, that it looks. In fact, there are places in South Memphis that look like you're in the third world, in terms of, and it's in part the dumping of tires, old cars, that is essentially eating up the earth in many of those places. And so environmental justice is a key question for us, and I'm glad you all are doing the work that you're doing, as well as a number of the folks that I've mentioned who are doing good work around it.
I was in San Antonio, Texas, a few months ago at one of the hotels there.
They need you to put you on.
I was in San Antonio, Texas.
Thank you.
A few months ago. I thought I'd just talk loud.
Talk loud.
In one of the only 5-star hotels in San Antonio, Texas. Now, if you ever want to find me in any town, and go to the 5-star hotel. Well, I was there in the lobby, and they had this 18th century Steinway that was just to die for, and the Renaissance meets creative art of the Art Deco world was just incredible. And I'm there, and I'm taking pictures, and just in awe and in love, and up and behold, here comes the security guard that says, "You can't take pictures here." Why? It's it's against the law. What are you doing here? Now, I'm a portly 60-year-old gentleman that usually dresses very much like this all the time. Do I look like a lorder to you? So I didn't even talk to him very much. I just asked him to come and follow me to his manager, and I asked his manager, why is he asking me questions about being here in this hotel? We saw racial profiling happen in the Doubletree Hotel right here in Portland, Oregon. Right. You all know about that, right? This is why Reverend Sekou is here tonight, tomorrow, to have our conversation, where we'll begin to have a dialogue about what black men feel about profiling. Something that I want you to understand is that black men in this country are under siege. Yes. And as we see this, I want to know the best way that this community, from your lens, ought to be responding to that.
I mean, the interesting thing at this particular moment, there's a peculiar way in the context of the United States that patriarchy plays itself out, right? So if rich white men are the standard, right, in terms of who is the most human and deserves the most rights, right? And this is this is talked about. This is not hyperbole. I'm talking about what's enshrined in law, right? In terms of beginning with those who had the right to vote, had to be property owning white men, right? And that enshrining in law has still played itself out in the spirit of the country and existentially, right? Because when we think about the elections, every election is a referendum on manhood. Who's the most manly? Not the smartest, right? Who's right? So there's this thing about, right, when people talk about, well, I can relate to Trump, right? That's about a certain exercising of white manhood in public space, right? And that's the model and the standard of what it is. And so, given that context, and so then, when you look at, particularly coming out of after the Reconstruction, which is a briefly bright moment in American history, afterwards, the lost cause issue emerges, and that part of the lost cause issue was around the criminalization of black men, particularly through the black code. So 3 black men can't gather together. That would be that was illegal in the late 1900s, and in most cities in the U.S. today. So they couldn't gather legally. So even though it's, you see what I'm saying? So it manifests itself through stop and frisk, loitering laws, right? So you ain't got no job, and you just standing around, you can't loiter, right? All of that is running through the course of the legal statutes of the United States. And so one of the ways in which it manifests is that black men, like you remember, we don't remember, but the film Birth of a Nation, which is about savagely black manhood juxtaposed to white women's innocence, right? One of the most important films in American history, right? And it's about, we've created laws to protect white women from black men. So it's a peculiar way in which patriarchy plays itself out in the United States, right? It's interesting. And then,